that you will likely be asked to work through without a calculator. So I want to go through a couple examples of that. Okay. So when you look at these two, or let's look at just the function on the left here. Okay, so here is the equation for that. If I were to ask you to either find all the zeros or write the factors of this, those are the two different sort of forms of this question that you might be asked. You should be able to do it without using a calculator by using the properties that we've discussed. So when you look at these zeros, they're not both integer zeros, but one of them is, right? So you know that -3 is a zero of this factor. And not only that, but you know, so the corresponding factor with an x or a 0 at -3 is x minus a -3 becomes x plus 3, correct? So that's, you know that that's a factor of this expression. Not just that, but how many of these factors are there going to be? 2, and you know that because it bounces off the intercept, right? So you know that this is going to be an x plus 3 quantity squared. So if you were doing this by hand, the way that you would work through and solve this problem would be the following. You could take your original equation, -12, -52, +12, 180. So if you set this up using synthetic division as a corresponding 0 at -3, what you would be able to do is drop the 12 down, multiply, combine down, multiply, combine down, multiply, and what should happen is you should get that remainder of 0. Okay? So what that means is you now are dealing with this expression. Well, you know that that factor, or that 0 of -3 happens twice. So I'm going to do this again with another -3. And when I do that, again, drop this down, I get -12. Multiply here, gives me 36. Combine straight down, 20. Multiply across, -60, so that cancels. So once again, you're working through your zeros. What that brings you to then is this final expression is -12x plus 10. Can you factor that by hand? Yeah, what common factor can you remove? Always take out the negative, so I have a negative. I can also take out a 4, and that leaves a 3x and a -5. And so what I see here is if I was asked to find the factored form of this, it would be a -4 times a 3x minus 5 times an x plus 3 squared, and that is my factored form. And I can do that without using a calculator. If I was asked to find the zeros, well, what 0 corresponds to this last remaining factor here? 5/3. Does that seem consistent with what I see right here? Yeah. And so if I was asked to find the zeros, then I'm looking at 5/3 and -3 are my two zeros. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk through this. So I'm not going to rewrite my expressions here. I'm just going to use their coefficients in my synthetic division. There's no missing terms, so I don't need to insert a 0 anywhere. And the 1, 0 I can identify here. I have a rational form, but it is a fraction. Here I know it's an integer, so at 3, I know I have a 0, so I can plug that in and use my synthetic division. I'm going to drop down my -4, again just using coefficients, multiply, get -12, combine down, 16, multiply, 48, combine down, -13, multiply, -39, combine down, +3, multiply, gives me 9, combine straight down, I have 0, which is what I expected, right? This is a factor, so the remainder should be 0. And because of this bounce, I know that there's going to be another factor of 3. So I'm going to repeat this a second time. So here, when I drop down, multiply, add down, multiply, add down, multiply, I get my remainder of 0, again confirming what I was expecting. So those are my two factors with the 0, 3. And when I look at what's left here, I have an x squared, an x to the first, and a 1, -1. So I'm going to, now it's in a quadratic form. Because this bounces here, I know this is going to be a binomial square, right? So that makes it easy for me to factor. Because what I want to do is take out my negative first. So I'm going to switch the sign of all my terms. And then I'm going to look to see what are the binomial square factors of this. Well, my first term is the base 2x squared. My second term is either plus or minus 1. Because my middle term's negative, I put a negative 1. And so here is my remaining factored form. So the 0 that corresponds with this is a 1/2. Is that consistent with what I see on my graph? Yeah, so here's my two zeros, 1/2 and 3. And when I look down here, if I was to write this in its factored form, I'll put my negative out front, my 2x minus 1 squared. And then the factor that corresponds with this 0 was x minus 3. It bounced, so I saw that there were two of them. And so that would be my factored form.